About a year ago, I did a video talking about the state of microbrands in 2019 and casting my mind forward to 2020. A few of you have been binge watching my old videos, and some of those have asked if I could revisit that video. I'll have a go. Welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. As I said, I'm going to have a look back at what I'd said in 2019 about the state of microbrands, see if it held true, and then cast my mind forward a year or two from now. First things first, I don't live and breathe in the microbrand space, certainly not as much as I did last year. So I'm very much coming from the point of view of someone who pretty much lives in the mainstream, looks down at microbrands that have done sufficiently well to punch through and make it into, as I say, normal mainstream watch media. If you're one of those guys or girls that lives down in the specialist area of Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and microbrands, and I say things which in your space are not true, that doesn't mean I'm wrong. It just means that from this perspective, we have different views. So with all of that said, let's go back and say, well, from my point of view, what did I say things were going to be like in 2019? What I said was that had never been a better time to be a consumer, but it was a tough time to be introducing a new brand. Never been a better time to be a consumer because the Wild West days of Kickstarter and Indiegogo were by and large gone. By 2019, there was a large selection of really solid brands that you could rely on to be there week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out. You could go to companies like Zelos or Spinnaker or Boulder or Christopher Ward or Helios, knowing that someone stood behind your watch and you could be supported. The second thing I said was that the reason it was getting tougher and tougher for new brands is because it had never been better for consumers. Because any new brand coming in was going to have to compete with microbrands, darlings of the enthusiast community that had now been around for a while, that had established a reputation, established user groups, established collector groups, established design language, and anything you did would have to somehow match or even exceed that. And even last year, we began to see brands that were doing okay and that were making their money on Kickstarter, but not able to punch through and ended up not being produced at all. So from 2020, looking back, what I would say is that by and large, I nailed it. That is pretty true. Everything I said then continues to be true now. It continues to be a great time for consumers of microbrands. Everything I said last time remains true now. There are good solid brands out there producing good solid watches that you can really rely upon. So if you're in that microbrand space, it remains a great place for you to be. It is also true, and it's possibly got truer, that it's a harder and harder place to break into. In getting ready for this, I did a whole bunch of research, not of microbrands, but of what people were saying about microbrands. And I went to Teddy and I went to a whole bunch of sites downloading sort of their lists of who were the best microbrands of 2020. And almost all of them were frequent flyers, were people that had been on these lists for a couple of years. There was very little turnover. Even the new brands that were making it onto the lists for the first time, if you dug into it, had been around for a couple of years. They just now gathered enough momentum to punch up into those brands. So Zelos and Spinnaker and Aviate and Monta and Anordain and Farah and all of those brands which have been kicking around for a couple of years, and Phoebus and all those brands that are on Jodie's channel. All of those brands have been around for some years, and they are and continue to be the mainstay of the microbrand community. But in there, if you were listening carefully to some of those brands I mentioned, one of the things you'll notice is some of those don't feel so much like microbrands anymore. A brand like Christopher Ward or Farah don't feel like a microbrand anymore. And in fact, if you do look in the list, some of the names that start cropping up are really quite surprising. Like Formex is now cropping up on many people's best microbrands lists. Now that's a company that's been around for 20 something years, that began life as a mainstream brand that is no different to other brands of its ilk, like say Edox or Atlantic or Archimedes, and a whole bunch of other brands that have got long histories. And yet somehow they managed to have positioned themselves as a microbrand in people's minds. Other brands that are cropping up on that list of microbrands is a brand like Norcane, a new Swiss brand, which is new and therefore small, and is being considered a microbrand despite the fact everyone behind it is a veteran of the Swiss watch industry. You know, they're ex-Breitling people and ex-Tudor people, and they're getting together and they've got special relationships with Tudor suppliers. And they're being considered now as a microbrand. Harage is in a similar position. Anodain, which is new, but looks at this also from another perspective, in that one of the things that used to be remarkable about a microbrand is it was a one-man show, often in consultation with designers or builders and watchmakers overseas, and it was all very hands-off. Now you're seeing brands like Anodain stepping forward and being seen as microbrands, despite the fact that they've got fairly heavy manufacturing facilities, fairly involved in the bluing of their hands, the manufacture and finishing of enamel dials, the casing up and final assembly of their watches, and yet they're being considered as a microbrand. And of course, you've got the Dartmouth brands like Aviate, Spinnaker, those guys who are actually just fronts of an enormous company that has huge manufacturing facilities, probably punching out more watches than many of the smaller Swiss brands every year, being considered a microbrand. And so what that does to me is it reinforces all the messages I'd said last time, which is that microbrands are an incredibly rich and safe and diverse place for consumers to go. However, and it's also an increasingly difficult place for a new microbrand to stand up and make noise, because what is these days considered a microbrand is essentially just a watchmaker. They're just like anyone else. They've got the same overheads, the same marketing, the same... I'm not sure what a microbrand even is anymore. When a company like Formex or Ming or Farah or Norcane or Harage or any of the Dartmouth brands can call themselves a microbrand, are considered a microbrand, what does that even mean? Does it have any meaning today? Or are these big companies pretending to be microbrands to try and surf that wave, get on that cool kid enthusiast vibe? I'm not sure. But what I would say is, in summary, the takeaway is that in 2020, if you like the idea of buying from microbrands or enthusiast brands or whatever you want to call them, never been a better time. If you want to be one of these companies, it's possibly never been a worse time, because that area now, you are not only competing with microbrands like Zelos and Helios that have been around for a while, that maybe meet the normal kind of microbrand model, but have reputations and everything. You're also competing against major manufacturers, large-scale organizations that have got significant history in the core Swiss watch industry, who, for whatever reason, are being able to market themselves as microbrands. And you've got large-scale, multi-million-dollar 10,000 watch a year, 50,000 watch a year producers like the Dartmouth guys, so the guys behind Spinnaker, who are also parading as microbrands. Anyway, that's my take on it in 2020 for the state of microbrands, whatever the hell that is. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, and I'll see you later. Bye.